This week brings a much needed bye week for OU men's basketball, something they weren't familiar with in the Big 12, but in the SEC, there's a week where there's no midweek game for each team. This happens to be the week for OU men's basketball as they sit with a 14-4 record, 1-4 in SEC play. We are here to break down what we've seen so far and where things stand for the OU men's basketball team. I am Jesse Crittenden. This is the latest episode of In the Paint, a basketball video series for OU Insider and the Rivals Network. I am joined, as always, by Brody Lusk. Brody, you mentioned it before we started recording. Kind of felt like a lot happened in the first couple of weeks for conference play, in conference play for this team, and now we kind of get a minute to breathe for just a second.
Yeah, not a lot of good. It was a rough couple weeks for Oklahoma basketball fans.
Yeah, let's talk about the latest thing for this OU men's basketball team, and that is after starting 0-4 in conference play with a couple of really, really tough losses in there. They bounced back against South Carolina at home last Saturday in a 20-point win, a game that Oklahoma just had to have. I mean, if it, to even pretend that this team still had a chance of making the NCAA tournament, they had to win that game. Pretty ugly game, Brody, for a lot of it. But OU goes on a 15-0 run late in that second half to kind of run away with it. Just, it's been a couple of days. We're recording this on Tuesday afternoon. What were your takeaways from that game for Oklahoma? Again, a game they just kind of had to have, but to their credit, they came away with a win.
I thought the score was pretty deceiving. They won by 20, but for a lot of that game, it was pretty ugly. At least from my take on it. But I thought looking at some of the more positive things, Jalen Moore had another nice game, 22 points, 8 rebounds. I thought he played really well. He got to the foul line 11 times, made 10 of them, so he did a really good job drawing fouls. And then I think Jeremiah Fears had a really nice bounce back game, played one of his better SEC games. To me, what stood out was 8 assists and 2 turnovers.
Hmm.
And turnovers were a huge issue for Oklahoma, during that big losing streak. And they were in the first half too. 11 first half turnovers against South Carolina, but they only had one in the second half. They played much better basketball in the second half, but in the first half, it was ugly. One of my biggest takeaways was also South Carolina is not a very good basketball team.
No, they're not good.
That was kind of apparent. I mentioned Oklahoma had 12 turnovers total, but South Carolina had 16. And Oklahoma turned it over 11 times in the first half. South Carolina turned it over 12 times. So that was kind of a game where Oklahoma could get away with playing a little sloppy.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple other things we can get into from that game that have kind of developed, or maybe have come up as developments for this team. But let's talk about the two big ones. Let's start with Jalen Moore, and you mentioned him there. Jalen's kind of look. We came into conference play thinking, hey, Jalen Moore was kind of the number one option or the number one scoring option for this team for most of non-conference play. But we kind of figured, hey, Jeremiah Fears is going to kind of step up and take that mantle in conference play. Brody, that hasn't happened, at least from a scoring perspective. It's kind of been the Jalen Moore show. Now, Jeremiah Fears leads the team in field goal attempts, but
Mhm.
Jalen Moore's been absolutely the most consistent scoring option for this team. And you look at his stats, first of all, just through conference play. I mean, Brody's averaging 19.8 points per game, shooting 60% from the field, 60% from three, 82% from the free throw line. You mentioned his free throw attempts. He got to the line 11 times against South Carolina. But Brody, I think in these last couple of weeks, especially, I mean, or these last couple of games, he scores 26 in the second half against Texas. He scores 22 against South Carolina. Was the only guy at halftime for OU who's in double figures. And we're going to talk about Jeremiah Fears in a second, but Brody, it kind of feels like, Jalen Moore has surpassed my expectations for him in conference play for the most part. And Brody, to be honest with you, it kind of feels like Jalen Moore's kind of the guy for this team. What have you seen from him, not only in conference play but these last couple of games?
Yeah, he's been more aggressive, and I think it's looked really good. The thing with Moore, it's been so consistent that there's times when he's scoring like 22 points and it's not that big of a deal. It kind of seems normal, which I
Right.
think speaks to his development. But that you mentioned that second half against Texas, he kind of just took over the game, and it was 26 points, but it was 8 for 8 from the field, and he was perfect shooting. And I thought it was really impressive to see him go on that run. But I do think he's cemented himself as the alpha. I kind of questioned how would he perform against like a Colin Murray Boyles of South Carolina, but he didn't have much of a problem with it. In fact, he was so aggressive attacking him that Murray Boyles fouled out of the game early.
Yeah.
So I've been pretty impressed with Jalen Moore. Definitely surpassed my expectations of what he would do in conference play through 5 games. And I think he's made himself some money these past couple games. NBA draft scouts definitely have heard that they've been pretty impressed with what they've seen from him. There was a lot of scouts at the Texas game, and he showed out in that game.
Yeah, that's a really good point about him because he was a guy coming into the year that, he mentioned, that he obviously he went through draft workouts last year. And the guys, the people were telling him that they wanted to see him improve his 3-point shot. And I
Yeah.
think, and also just do more than maybe attack closeouts. He's been pretty impressive and I think has shown kind of a developed all around game in a way that I really didn't think was going to happen. And you look at who OU has played so far. Now, South Carolina is obviously maybe the worst team in the SEC, but Texas A&M, Alabama, Texas. I mean, these are good defensive teams, and especially, I mean, that Texas game as a whole was abysmal. Not only the loss, but going down 20. But Jalen Moore, it looked like Texas had no answers for him, and,
Yeah.
and I wonder if that. I think it's real, at least to this point.
Yeah.
It's real.
I mean, some of the numbers across the board are pretty impressive with Jalen Moore. 3-point made per attempt. His 3-point percentage is 43%, 88th in the country, which you mentioned that was one of the big things he needs to improve on. I didn't expect him to like keep that rate going throughout the whole year. He has so far. It's been pretty impressive. He's actually in the 5 SEC games in conference rank. He's first among all SEC teams in 3-point shooting 60% in these 5 conference games, which to me, I think he needs to be more like he needs to shoot the ball. Against Texas, he shot it 5 times from deep. Against South Carolina, only 1 time. 3-point shooting to me has kind of been a struggle for this team. I would like to see him, 4 attempts per game, right? Increase volume from behind the arc, but also like in SEC play, he's first in effective field goal percentage, first in true shooting percentage. And then like you look at all these other stuff like offensive rating 24th, 25th in usage rate. So it's been really impressive to see him just kind of I've been blown away by the way he's been able to play in the past couple games. And I think it feels like he really has some more that he hasn't unlocked yet.
No, I agree. And let's talk about kind of the other side of that, and that's Jeremiah Fears, a guy that through the first 5 games. I mean, he's been the guy to watch for this program, right? Not only I think for fans and for the media, but from a national perspective, he's been projected as a lottery pick in next year's draft for a lot of the year. It's been a bit up and down for
Yeah.
Jeremiah Fears, right? I mean, you look at his stats. There's been some good moments from a but then from a counting stat perspective, I mean, he's shooting 37% from the field, 16% from three, even 74% from the line, which is fine but not great. But then you see, he's kind of had an all around. He's been really good in other areas, right? I mean, he's second on the team in rebounding, over 5 a game, leads the team in assists, over 4 a game. So I think Saturday that A&M game was, or sorry, that South Carolina game was kind of summed up his conference play to this point, right? Where the shooting isn't there, but I mean, he almost has a triple double. He's been helpful in other ways. How would you evaluate the first 5 games in conference play for Jeremiah Fears, and what's the biggest thing that stands out?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, the 3-point shooting hasn't been good. It's 3 for 19 in the 5 conference games, 15% from deep. He just hasn't. His shot has not been there, and it's weird because as a prospect, he was really a very solid 3-point shooter in Michigan against Michigan, 3 for 4 from deep. So it feels like maybe that's just maybe he's tired. I don't know, but the shots haven't been there. They haven't fallen yet. If they could start falling, that'd be huge. But I think the South Carolina game to me was a good sign from him because obviously when you have a freshman who has the 16th highest usage rate in the country, there's gonna be some turnovers. I think Porter mentioned this after the Texas game. He did have 6 against Texas. You'd like it to be lower than 6, but he bounced back against South Carolina and only had 2. So it does kind of like it seems like he's starting to get his feel of conference play because it's an adjustment. I mean, like playing Alabama and Prairie View A&M, it's two completely different animals. To me, it felt like the length was bothering him a little bit in those first couple games, and it does seem like, looking at Texas, he scored 20. Looking at South Carolina, he scored 16. It has seemed like he's kind of started to get that feel for him. I'm watching to see, can he build off of the second half against Texas and the game against South Carolina and really start to assert himself a little bit more, kind of get out of that slump he was in the first couple games of conference play.
Well, and the reality is that I think, look, you need him to shoot better, obviously, and I think you need him to be more consistent offensively as a scorer. But, if Jalen Moore can really keep this up and be a guy that can be a true number one option for a decent offense, I mean, the offensive numbers for OU aren't terrible. I mean, in
Yeah,
conference play, I mean, they're not amazing. But for the year, they're eighth in the conference in scoring. They're eighth since conference play started in the SEC in scoring. So I mean, it's kind of been a middle of the packed offense. But if Jalen Moore can be a consistent 20 points per game on good efficiency kind of scorer, maybe that takes the burden off of Jeremiah Fears a little bit because I think we all went into conference play thinking, look, all this other stuff is great. That the outside shooting from some of the role players is great, but obviously this team is going to live and die with Jeremiah Fears. I do think there's a middle ground between, yeah, you need Jeremiah to shoot better than what he's shooting right now, but maybe you don't need him to be this amazing, incredibly efficient number one guy as a freshman. Not to mention, he's been the number one guy on scouting reports for these other teams, and even Buzz
yeah.
Williams for Texas A&M said that their top priority was getting the ball out of his hands and making things hard for him.
Yeah, and didn't Buzz Williams mention that it's never seen a freshman with that type of a usage rate?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
I think I definitely agree. There's some value to just have Fears be a point guard, right? You're not asking him to be your number one scorer, and obviously there'll still be games where he takes over as the number one scorer. That's just the type of player he is. But I do think there's some value to looking at him as a point guard and saying, hey, we'll play him at the one, Kobe Elvis, kind of Duke Miles at the two, and then Jay Moore is he's gonna be the scorer. He's gonna be the alpha scorer. So I'm interested to see as Fear starts to adjust, like you mentioned, to the different scouting reports and what different teams are throwing at him, how it looks between a scoring breakdown between him and Jalen Moore.
Funny thing for this Oklahoma team, through conference play, look, like I said, they're eighth in scoring. They're second in field goal percentage since conference play started. The thing that has kind of not been fantastic for them, and this is unlike Porter Moser teams, is the defense. The
Yeah.
in conference since conference play started, they're 12th in field goal percentage allowed. They're 13th. They're tied for 13th in points per game allowed. Kind of an interesting flip for, I mean, really, since Porter Moser got to Oklahoma, it's been the offense has been the issue, not the defense. It's kind of now the offense hasn't been amazing, but the offense hasn't necessarily been the problem for this team. That's just kind of as an interesting aside. Brody, I wanted to ask, look, the last couple of games we've seen a starting lineup change. We've seen Bryson Goodine go into the starting lineup for Kobe Elvis. We've seen Kobe Elvis kind of be that sixth man primary guy off the bench. What do you think of the results through these first two games, and how much do you think is that the look for Oklahoma moving forward, or do you expect or think we might see kind of a fluid situation for that fifth spot?
I I don't know. I mean, look, you heard it in the post-game press conference. Porter was very careful to not say, that he's not going to bring Kobe Elvis back into the five. Personally, I think the starting five will change within the next couple games. That's just the way I look at it. I think Kobe Elvis will be back in the starting lineup, whether that be for Goodine or Duke Miles. I don't know, but to me, that's the way I see it. I would be pretty surprised if Elvis doesn't log a start in one of these next couple games. As far as this five, on paper, I actually think it's a good idea because you're getting taller with Goodine. But against Texas, they didn't start either half very well, and they moved Goodine into the starting lineup, and he only attempted 1 3. If you're going to move Goodine into the starting lineup, to me, you need to get him more 3-point looks because that's what Goodine does well is shoot threes. Against South Carolina, it looked a little bit better. I still think like their best five has not been the starting five. In the past couple games, it's been with Glenn Taylor on the floor. It's been with Mo Waggy on the floor. And obviously, I don't expect Mo Waggy to start anytime soon, but there is some value to mixing up your starting lineup based on different opponents. Maybe we see them look at it and say, "Oh, we could use more defense in this game. We'll go with Duke Miles. We could use more offense. We'll go with Kobe Elvis." Maybe that's something they look at, but I would be surprised if Elvis isn't back in the starting lineup soon.
You mentioned one of the guys I wanted to ask you about next. I wanted to ask you about a couple of bench guys, and that's Mo Waggy and Dayton Forsythe. A couple of guys that over the last couple of games, I think have shown they need minutes. And Dayton Forsythe was a guy we talked about a little bit the last time. We did one of these videos. He was not in the rotation to start conference play. I think really only got a shot in that Texas game because they were down so much in that second
Yeah.
half. But you're seeing not only the effort from Forsythe, but you're seeing some real playmaking and some real scoring. And I think Waggy, he's been in some of it. I think is the lack of effectiveness by Sam Godwin. But Brody, when I look at these two guys, I see these two guys as I don't know. I think you got to get these guys more minutes than what we've seen the last couple games. What are you seeing from them, and how much do you expect those two guys to be big parts of the rotation moving forward?
To me, you have to use this week off to get Dayton Forsythe even more involved. The thing about him, and he's done this even in high school, the thing he did was he played winning basketball. And it seemed like against Texas, look, he scored 0 points, didn't even attempt a shot. But all those different plays he makes, it's like he's hustling, he's leaving it out there.
Anybody that watched that game saw what kind of impact Forsythe had on the floor, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and then you see him against South Carolina. He only played 13 minutes. I would like to see it be higher than 13 minutes, but he scores 5 points on 1 for 2 shooting. His first play of the game when he gets in, hits a mid-range jumper, and then he hits that three while he's trailing behind Duke Miles. And it's like, and he didn't make any mistakes in that game. And to me, that's what stood out with Forsyth. He's a freshman. As his minutes increase, there's going to be mistakes, but maybe they're not the careless turnovers that we've seen at times from this team. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how he grows as his minutes increase, assuming that they do. It just, to me, it feels like the more comfortable Forsyth gets, the better that this team will be. That's the way I view it.
I agree. I agree. Now let's talk about where things are with this team right now. As we mentioned, they're 1-4 in conference play. In this bye week, heading into a road contest against an Arkansas team that has struggled quite a bit. I think they're 0-5 in conference play. Brody, look, despite I kind of thought this team needed to be 3-2 in the first five conference games. They're not. They're 1-4, but odds are still on their side for making the NCAA tournament. They still have, according to Joe Lunardi with ESPN, they still are listed as one of the last four teams with a bye, and they're in his bracketology for the NCAA tournament. Look, we've said all along that they needed to get probably to 8 wins to feel really good. That's obviously still in play, but where is this team at right now, 1-4, heading into this Arkansas game? How should fans feel about where this team is right now?
Well, I mean, fans should thank Michigan, Louisville, and Arizona for having the success that they've had so far because that's three top 30 wins according to KenPom, right? Those three teams have all been very successful so far. And so Oklahoma does have three, really nice quad one wins. I, you have to win the Arkansas game. But I think if they get to 6-12, they're where they've been the past couple years on the bubble. Maybe you get in, maybe NC State or some other team goes on a wild run and you don't get in. But I think you get to 6 wins. I think that's possible, right? 5 more wins. I would think they could do that. Not if they don't beat Arkansas. But, I think fans should I don't know. It's hard to sit here and say fans should be cautiously optimistic. I wouldn't even say that. I would say, somewhere in the middle of, oh, you lose this game against Arkansas and it's probably too big of a hole to climb out of, would you say?
Yeah, it feels like, I mean, as much as that South Carolina win was nice to to kind of bounce back, it feels like step one, right?
Yeah.
And I think beating Arkansas is step two because you mentioned, look, this was always a different kind of good start to non-conference play compared to other Porter Moser teams, right? Because they had several more marquee wins, and even this 1-4 start to conference play isn't like the other years because you mentioned, the Michigan win, the Louisville win. Those wins are really carrying them right now. But I've said I think this team needs to get to 7 wins at minimum to feel decently. And I think if you're thinking about where this, I mean, they haven't made the tournament, in several years. They haven't made it under Porter Moser. If you're trying to squash all doubts about making the tournament, it probably needs to be 8 or 9 wins. And if you
Yeah.
don't, if you don't win this Arkansas team, just that path to you mentioned, I mean, that path to even 6 wins, let alone 7 or 8, starts to get kind of slim. They still got to play Tennessee. They still got to play Auburn. They still got to play Kentucky. It's just, I think that's the thing is they've even this 1-4 start they still have a margin of error because of some of those non-conference wins, but at some point these games like Arkansas, those are games you have to win because you're probably not going to get some of those wins against Tennessee and Auburn, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think for the majority of the fan base, it's hard to get excited when they do get excited and then watch them choke away that A&M game and then the Texas game happens, right? And so I think Oklahoma needs to yes, beat Arkansas, but they need to find an upset win, in my
Yeah.
opinion, get to that 7 wins. Well, I mean, that'll have to happen to get to 7 wins. I think 6 is more likely, which probably leaves you out of the tournament if we're being honest. But they could get to 7 wins because there's some things with this team that it's like Mo Wage's emerged. Dayton Forsyth is kind of he's played very well coming on recently. Jalen Moore's been doing this. Maybe you can, use that second half of the Texas game and build off that moving forward. But I don't know. Like looking at their schedule, it's tough game after tough game. Like you've got Arkansas and then you go to A&M. So, the SEC's it's very difficult. Every game's a tough game, but at the same time, that gives you opportunities to pick up a big win on any night.
I would say I think the main thing for me approaching, kind of the rest of conference play is unfortunately where Oklahoma is. They had a margin of error coming into conference play because of the way they played, in non-conference, but I think that margin of error is kind of gone, right?
Yeah.
If you beat Texas and especially if you beat Texas A&M and M and you're 3-2 right now, things feel a lot different and maybe there isn't so much pressure to win this Arkansas game. There's not so much pressure to be perfect the rest of the year. I think they're sitting fine, but that margin of error is kind of gone, and that being another way of saying all of a sudden these games against Arkansas, it can't be just a tough night. We'll get them next time. No, all of a sudden these are the kind of games you have to win. You have to beat Arkansas on Saturday. You just
They
do.
have to go 2-3 in their next 3 games. You
Yeah.
have to beat Arkansas on the road, and then you have to beat Vandy at home. And I think like some of the eye test to me also is one thing that makes me a little less confident in this team. It was a 20-point win against South Carolina. It just didn't look good at all for like half of the game.
Yeah.
And like we said, South Carolina's not a great basketball team. So, I don't know. Maybe they'll start just playing better basketball and start figuring some stuff out. But, the next week is going to be very interesting and very telling to what this team's rest of the season will look like. Because if you lose this Arkansas game and you lose to A&M, it's going to get rock bottom that we've seen in the Porter Moser era.
I think it's kind of the hard thing with the Arkansas game is because it's like
It's
it
SEC road game.
Yeah, it's an SEC road game, and the reality is like this is one of those games where if you win, it doesn't move the needle that much,
Yeah.
but if you lose, it moves the needle a lot.
Yeah.
That's kind of where things are at with this team right now. That's kind of not the place you want to be heading into a must-win game where even if you win, it doesn't do that much, but if you lose, it hurts you a lot,
It's
right?
hard to win any SEC game on the road, and I should add some more context as to why we're acting like this is such a must-win game. Arkansas is going to be likely. I mean, Boogie Fland's set to miss their game, their midweek game, and the way John Calipari's talking is he'll also be out, for the Oklahoma game. He averages 15.1 points, 5.7 assists. They've been bad in SEC play, and then you take away their point guard. you have to look at this game for Oklahoma as you've got to go win it because they only have 9 scholarship players, and now you're taking away one of their better ones. Like that's to me, that's just another reason that makes it feel like this is much more of a must-win game.
Brody, this is an Arkansas team that's 15th in the SEC in scoring. They're
Yeah.
averaging 64 points a game and they're dead last in field goal percentage. They're not even shooting 38% from the field. So yeah, it's a road game. This doesn't mean Arkansas is an awful team, but if you're judging it from what else Oklahoma has on its schedule, you can't lose to an Arkansas team without their point guard that is this bad offensively. You
Hey,
just can't.
Porter Moser's had some success against Arkansas his time at Oklahoma.
Yes, he has, and Oklahoma has been familiar. I mean, obviously it's the John Calipari regime
Yeah.
now, but OU's played Arkansas each of the last 3 years, and now, but this won't be at the BOK Center. Obviously, this will be in Fayetteville. You will be on hand for that game in Fayetteville, Arkansas, on Saturday. We will have everybody covered here on the OU Insider YouTube channel and over at OUinsider.com. Become a VIP subscriber today. Make sure to like and subscribe here at this OU Insider YouTube channel. Me and Brody will keep you guys up to date with coverage, not only from Saturday's game, but for the rest of the season. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, we'll be back on the next installment of In the Paint. Until then, we'll see you guys next time.